Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show Lisa Daftari. She is an award-winning investigative journalist, and perhaps you've even seen her on Fox News. She's an expert in the Middle East and counterterrorism. Lisa, real pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be with you.
I guess the introduction is having you as an expert on counterterrorism. Some people might think is a little bit weird because I want to talk about Iran, but I'm guessing that to you it's pretty obvious. Iran has been in the news a lot with all of the negotiations with the U.S. From an Israeli standpoint, where I'm sitting, it's not looking so good. But why is it that people in the United States are also against it?
There are a lot of people against it, and unfortunately, this opposition against the Iran deal has been written off as a GOP or pro-Israel, a pro-Zionist agenda. But meanwhile, like you said, there's so many people who are against it, including people in the United States, lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle, including members of the Democratic Party who are extremely high-ranking. But also, you have the other unlikely members of the opposition who are the Saudis and the Egyptians, people in the region. So unfortunately, while this, has really been summarized to be something that Bibi Netanyahu's agenda to come to Congress and petition against it or rally lawmakers against it, or it's, lawmakers on the right here in the United States, people who understand the details and are not limiting themselves to this short-sighted narrative that's been sold by those who are for the deal. And namely, that's this narrative that either we have to have this deal or we have to have a war. And before about 15 years ago, or more, I should say, let's say 10 to 15 years ago, the narrative was also the same. Either we have to bomb Iran or allow them to get the bomb. So this third option that I spoke about 10 years ago, I did a documentary while I was in graduate school, and I was invited to Congress to show the documentary. It was about the third option, that we don't have to bomb them, they don't have to get the bomb, but we can push for regime change in Iran. And a regime change in Iran will mean relief for the people in the country who are suffering under social and cultural and religious and economic marginalization, as well as the region where you have Iran being the number one exporter of terrorism. So, not only threatening to take Israel off the map, but also, supporting Hezbollah and giving supplies and other material support to Hezbollah and Hamas, propping up the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. So that would have been, the real game changer in the region wouldn't have been to sit down at the negotiating table with the mullahs, but to actually push for significant change in the region, namely to reform or change Iran's government.
It seems that the United States in the past has not been so successful at regime change. And in fact, you mentioned Syria, where the United States completely failed at that. Why do you think that's really a feasible and possible solution?
Well, because there's never been a follow-through or a step-by-step plan to do any sort of regime change. We've done half jobs. So in terms of Syria or even in Egypt, when we ported the ousting of the Mubarak regime after 3 decades of him being a very decent partner in the region, we had there was no guidance in the follow-through. And I'm not saying that the U.S. or the West should decide who comes in the aftermath. This has to be a grassroots type of operation where...
But we're not seeing, there's no grassroots that we're reasonably able to support in Iran. I mean, we may see that, or we like to say that people are unhappy, but when the CIA goes in and tries to start turning people, it has a lot of a bad taste in the mouth for a lot of Americans because of the number of times it's failed, not only in the Middle East, but around the world.
Well, absolutely. But when you look at the alternative, this deal, it's really just keeping them right around the corner from a nuclear weapon. And, it's not just the nuclear weapon. This deal it's basically doing away with any leverage that we have for any behavioral change, because the West did not want to include any of those to request anything more from the Iranian regime. So the reason that they came to the negotiating table is quite easy. It's a very simple equation, is that they were suffering under the economic sanctions, and that's how we were holding their feet to the fire. Now you have 3, possibly 4 Americans being held by the Iranian regime. Now remember, 36 years ago, the reason why we have this estranged relationship with this new Iranian regime that came in after the Shah is because of the hostage crisis. Now, if you look, it's not on the same scale. But when you have 3, possibly 4 American hostages still being held in Iranian prisons, why are we sitting down with their rulers? Why are we sitting down with the mullahs, the same mullahs who are executing over 1,000 people a year? Why are we sitting down with the same mullahs who are still exporting suicide bombings and again, supporting all these different terrorist entities in the region? I mean, this is a lose-lose situation for everybody who's involved, including the people, the region, and the West, who's sitting down with the Iranian regime.
All right, this is getting a little pessimistic. We're talking to Lisa Daftari, who is a journalist. She is probably very well known. You've seen her on Fox News as well as on CBS, NBC, PBS, all around the media. She's an expert in the region where I live. And I started off, Lisa, by pointing out that from a safety standpoint, someone living in Israel like me, I'm a little concerned about what's going on with Iran. But let's look at it from the point of view of an American or maybe a European. I'll tell you, it's funny. Since the deal has been set up, I've gotten a number of emails, I guess, from people who didn't know where I sat, saying, "Dear Mr. Goldstein, the changes with Iran are creating fantastic financial opportunities. Call us to talk about investing." Now, obviously, I don't, and I'm not interested, but maybe there's something to it. A regime that has been under sanctions for so long and is finally freed, there must be opportunities. Isn't this, in fact, a financial opportunity for Americans and Europeans?
Sure. Absolutely. No one can deny that. You have a robust economy. You have 75 million Iranians who are interested in doing business with the West. You have investors of all kinds in Europe, in Russia, in China, in the United States. And it's almost like when these floodgates open, it's a tremendous opportunity. And no one's denying that. But the reason why this punitive measures were put on the Iranian regime is because we know it's such a wonderful opportunity. We know how much money will be released, much more than actually has been cited, by the way. But again, that economic free-for-all that will be created will take any sort of pressure off of the regime for any kind of change, whether it be regarding their nuclear program or whether it be regarding their human rights or support of financing terror. And that's really what it comes down to. If you're someone who's looking to invest in Iran, this is a wonderful opportunity for you. You're obviously going to support the deal. If you're someone living in Iran, you might be one of the ones who are celebrating on the streets. Now, this is a major part of the coverage that I do, interviewing people on the ground in different parts of the world, and obviously Iran being one of them, as I speak and read and write Farsi. And it's interesting because you only have a smaller segment of the population, people who really understand the political ramifications of this deal, still oppose it, because they understand that this will be taking off any shackles that remain on the Iranian regime and any sort of leverage that will allow them to have real significant changes back at home.
But ultimately, do these, what you're describing as shackles, which really are sanctions because there has been no real military action except maybe spy work that Israel does to destroy their reactors, it seems as though these sort of moves often don't work. And again, I think that, we could cite examples like Cuba or North Korea, which for decades have been under sanction, and Iran as well. And it doesn't seem to move the needle. And maybe this model where you say, okay, listen, we're just not able to change things. Let's try a different approach and make them friends. Is there any logic to that?
Well, it doesn't move the needle in one direction and it doesn't move it in the other. At least it keeps them at bay. Now we're going to see movement in the other direction, meaning we're going to see more growth from Iran. And the bottom line in terms of the sanctions is that, first of all, the Iranian regime would not come to the negotiating table had they not been suffering under the sanctions. Secondly, the threat of a civil uprising is much greater when there's economic pressure. Remember, look at, whether it was Iran 36 years ago or the Arab Springs, the region, people don't come into the streets because of these lofty desires of democracy and justice and freedom. They come to the streets because of the price of bread, because they can't get jobs. So, it takes that threat off the table for the Iranian regime as well. And remember, the Achilles heel of the Iranian regime is not the P5+1. It's really having to deal with another grassroots uprising similar to the one we saw in 2009. And, the truth of the matter is that when you see people in Iran celebrating on the streets after the deal was pushed through, it's a short-lived and very relative gain that they're celebrating. Because when the people were suffering under sanctions over the last few years, and maybe more targeted sanctions over the last 5 or 6, the regime was still pouring money into Syria and into Hezbollah and into Hamas. So if you look at a country where they actually care for the people, instead of putting that money back into the people's economy, the Main Street economy, and subsidizing the way, actually under Ahmadinejad, we had more subsidies in terms of electricity and water and basic needs. And now you see those taken away because, again, they're investing in their regional agenda more so than and allowing the people to suffer under sanctions, because the propaganda on the ground in Iran has always been, you don't want to pay this much for bread. It's because the West, it's because of the U.S., it's because of Israel. They're the ones who are making us suffer. So again, I feel as though these punitive measures, as you mentioned, in a lot of cases don't work. But when they are targeted, when the Iranian people understand that there is an agenda or there is a follow-through, there's something attached to it, where there is a goal at the other side, whether the sanctions, the pathway of sanctions was meant to lead to regime change, that wasn't explained to the Iranian people, or whether these shackles, as we spoke about, were meant to at least curb Iran's behavior in terms of supporting, financing terror.
I just want to wrap up because we're running out of time on this last question, which is the Iranians have for a long time been very clear about their goal to destroy Israel. Is this really a goal, or is this just some kind of saber rattling to position themselves as the big anti-Israel folks, but really it's not something we have to?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that when I speak to a lot of more politically astute Iranians, they talk about how on the ground in Iran there's not really a hatred for the U.S. or for Israel, but that it's something that has worked. So since the first days that this regime took office in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution, they used this Islamic hegemony as their go-to. It worked in the Iran-Iraq War. It's worked ever since. And they get lower sectors of lower economic brackets within the country to attend these rallies where they say death to America, death to Israel. And like any country, the lower economic sectors that are receiving checks from the government will go and say and do whatever the government wants of them. So, I think you have, but on the other hand, of course, Israel has every right to be fearful. When rulers have for over 3 decades have threatened to take them off the map and are in such close proximity. And at this point, we've never seen a U.S.-Israel relationship be so strained. Israel obviously has every reason to be worried. But in the long run, let's end on a positive note. I think that I think Israel has more friends and more new and unlikely alliances in the region based on interests. And they should look to the Saudis and the Egyptians and others who share in their opposition against the deal.
All right. Well, I will take that optimism to the bank. And if it doesn't work out, Lisa, we're going to bring you back to explain why. We've been talking with Lisa Daftari. Lisa, in the last few seconds, just tell me, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Sure. So on Facebook, Twitter, or my website, it's lisadaftari.com. And I'm also launching a new foreign affairs website called Foreign Desk. It's foreigndesknews.com. That should be launching very soon. And I hope you visit and let me know what you think. Okay, we will put a link to all of that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Lisa, thanks so much for your time. Absolutely.
You are listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.